Harv happens to be working at the farm today, and I thought that it would be a great opportunity for him to talk about fertilizers and amendments. And there are a couple things that I was hoping you could cover. One would be the time of year to put certain amendments down. Some of the amendments get put down more frequently than once a year, so I'm mentioning that. And then I was hoping that you could talk about the amount to spread on different trees, and so that people would have a good idea of what to get for their trees and how to use it.
If your trees are in really good shape, doing everything they're supposed to do and looking nice and green, then you can even skip a year and not put on anything, or you can fertilize once a year after the harvest. If your tree is still small and needs to grow more, or if it is looking yellowish without enough leaves, or branches dying back, or if the fruits have had any internal breakdown or other problems, well then definitely they need fertilizer, and probably 2 or 3 times a year even. So we range from 0 times a year to 3 or even more times a year if you're using fast release cheap fertilizers. Now if you use medium price fertilizers that have the nitrogen and the potassium as slow release, well then you don't need to do more than 3 times a year at most. So we're right after the harvest now, pruning the trees, and then next is fertilization. On our poor sandy soils here in many parts of the southeast Florida coast and West Florida also, most places are sandy soil. Mangoes like sandy soil with a good drainage and all, but old dune sand doesn't have much in it that trees need. If a tree manages to get really big and has roots many yards down, then maybe they're reaching a coral or shell rock layer and getting plenty of calcium and magnesium and other things way down there. But any tree that is so far just rooted out in sand is going to need a lot of amendments in order to be strong, disease resistant, and productive. Mangoes are not native to this area, so don't let someone talk to you about what native plants do real well without fertilizer and all that. But mangoes are not from here, and they need some extra stuff. Mangoes need more calcium than any other mineral. And most fertilizer mixes that we use have little or no calcium in them. So often the most important thing for our mangoes and many other fruit trees as well is to give the trees in sandy soil a source of calcium. Besides mangoes, this is very important for black sapotes and canistel and other plants that are native to the Yucatan Peninsula, which is high in calcium, and some other plants from high calcium areas around the world. You cannot expect them to do well here without giving them plenty of calcium. So with mangoes, it's more of a medium need than with the black sapotes and canistel. The easiest way to put out calcium without changing the pH of the soil is to apply gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. You can get gypsum that's naturally mined, or you can get gypsum that's industrial byproduct. If you're into organic production and want certified products, then you'll be looking for the naturally mined gypsum, which this is one example of here. So, ProGyp. There are several others as well. And in my opinion, the plants can't tell the difference if you use an industrial byproduct gypsum. It's still calcium sulfate, and in most cases does not have any serious impurities. All gypsum, whether naturally mined or industrial byproduct, is going to have some so-called impurities. Impurities are only a concern if it's something that you actually don't want in a plant, such as cadmium or lead or mercury. Gypsum needs to be applied every time you plan to put out fertilizer, and maybe an extra time during the year, especially if there's a lot of rain, because it can wash out from the soil. Another way to apply calcium is to apply lime. There are many different kinds of lime, such as dolomitic lime or dolomite, that has both calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. That's good for plants that are native to areas that are high in limestone, but plants that are not from those areas tend to be hurt if you put out very much calcium carbonate, because the pH raises, and then those plants have a hard time getting enough manganese, iron, and zinc, and maybe some other elements as well. Plants that are native to high lime areas, high calcium carbonate areas, are adapted to produce an exudate from the roots that solubilizes the calcium carbonate and makes the calcium in it available to the plants. Plants that are not adapted to perform that procedure may be sitting in high lime soil and still have calcium deficiency because they're not able to get the calcium out from the calcium carbonate very efficiently. With calcium sulfate, any plant, as far as I know, can easily absorb that and use it. If your yard or grove is on soil that is high in limestone or shell rock or marl, all of which have calcium carbonate, you can make calcium sulfate from that by spreading sulfur. Don't spread sulfur powder. A lot of that will blow away. It's bad for your lungs and eyes and skin. What you want is sulfur in pellet form that we call prilled sulfur. You can get Rocket 90 or Tiger 90 or several other brands, all of which have 90% sulfur and 10% clay. You can't make balls of plain sulfur. You have to have the clay with it to make the balls. There's very little dust, very little irritation to your skin, even if you don't use gloves, spreading, for a few minutes that prilled sulfur. If you're going to be spreading any fertilizer very long, you're going to want gloves of some sort to protect your skin from drying out or from absorbing some of the ingredients of some fertilizers, such as manganese. Manganese is an essential element as part of our food and of plants, but we don't want to absorb excess amounts of it because then we'll have nerve damage. With the gypsum, I like to spread the same amount as the amount of fertilizer that I'm going to spread and over the same area. Sometimes I'll spread 2 or 3 times more gypsum than the fertilizer, especially if it's the first application of gypsum. If I'm convinced that the trees have calcium deficiency and are bad off because of that, then I want 1 or 2 or 3 corrective applications, which means applying a lot more than what you would apply for maintenance level applications. With both gypsum and mixed fertilizers, I like to spread it by handfuls, kind of a bowling motion, opening my fingers so that the fertilizer or the gypsum spreads thin and wide. I don't want to see any bands or clumps of any of it. I want to see the individual pieces separated from each other, and people sometimes have to look closely to see it at all. Landscapers consider that to be a disadvantage because when someone pays for the fertilization to be done, they tend to want to come out and see it. And if it's not obvious, they may think that the job wasn't done and they were charged for it anyway. But when you're taking care of your own trees, you should know that spreading thin and wide is what works best. You are highly unlikely to cause fertilizer burn. You're unlikely to kill any hair roots with too much mineral salts in any one spot. And all the roots of the tree, or at least the vast majority of the roots of the tree, will be getting some of everything that they need. You should remember that well-established trees have roots far out beyond the drip line. And the roots back by the trunk are big and woody and don't absorb much of anything. So you don't bother to fertilize a big tree like this until you're about 8 or 10 feet away from the trunk all around. And then you spread under the whole canopy and keep going as far as you did under the canopy. So if I do like 20 feet under here, I'm going to go at least 12 or 15 feet out that way, and 20 would be great. We usually do not fertilize trees this big, and there are at least 2 different reasons for that. One, the tree has roots so deep into the soil and so wide that if it looks healthy, it's probably getting everything that it needs anyway. Unless you notice that the fruit have jelly seed or internal breakdown, indicating that there's not enough calcium or boron or zinc, then you need to fertilize. If the tree isn't very fruitful, maybe fertilization would help with that. But if it's huge and producing a lot and the leaves look healthy, just skip it. If you do fertilize, it's going to take like 3 bags for one tree this size. So that will be kind of expensive. So just use your best judgment. I consider gypsum to be a fertilizer, but the state fertilizer institutes call it a soil amendment. Whatever, the plant doesn't care what words we put on it. Years ago, I formulated fertilizers for the Rare Fruit Council, the 8312, which is similar to the 8212 palm fertilizers that work well for newly planted mangoes and other fruit trees and for the first couple of years. They also work well, the 8212 palm fertilizers or the 8312 Rare Fruit Council fertilizer work well on trees that look sickly, yellow, branch dieback, and so on. However, with mango trees and some other trees such as lychees and longans, once the trees get to be about the size that you want them to get, then it's better to stop applying nitrogen. Nitrogen is represented by the first number in formulas. So 8212 has 8% nitrogen. That's what the 8 means. So if you have two 50-pound bags, you'll have 8 pounds of nitrogen in the total 100 pounds of fertilizer. And that's the actual element, not the molecule that it's in. You'll have more pounds of the actual molecules that the nitrogen is in, such as nitrate or ammonium. With mangoes and lychees and longans that are the size that you want, you go with a fertilizer that has 0 as the first number or a very low number such as 2 or 3. So I formulated for the Rare Fruit Council the 0316, and we now have a mix here at Truly Tropical, which is 0322. Just Miss Chris Wenzel just got this here this year. The other mix was for some reason not available at the moment, and so this other one is very similar and works well, and of course has even more potassium because the third number in the formula represents the potassium. So what I formulated had 16% potassium, and this has 22% potassium. So more potassium can often be better, provided there's enough calcium. If the soil is poor in calcium and you're not applying any gypsum or lime, and you go and apply a high potassium fertilizer like this, you can do more harm than good. You'll be causing an imbalance. So remember, first think about the calcium. If you're sure from a soil test that your soil has enough calcium for mangoes, not just enough calcium for pine trees or whatever, but enough calcium for mangoes, then you would maybe just apply a maintenance amount of calcium sulfate. Or sulfur if your soil is very high in calcium. And then you apply the mixed fertilizer with everything else in it. Preferably it would have all the micronutrients and minor nutrients. So the minor ones are considered to be calcium for some reason. That doesn't make sense to call it minor. Magnesium and sulfur. And then the micronutrients are iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, and molybdenum. And you want to make sure your trees are getting all of those. If you are trying to do certified organic production, you can't use the mixed fertilizers in most cases because the certification for organic production requires you to do soil tests and only apply the individual elements that the soil test proves are low or lacking. So in most cases you won't find an already available mixed fertilizer that will cover all those items. You may have to get a custom mix or apply each element separately. So this gypsum is approved for organic production, and it's great for anybody else who's not worried about that classification. This other one is not okayed for organic production, even though there's no single item in it that would not be allowed in organic production. We do look for that when we choose mixes to buy. We want all the ingredients to be allowable in organic production, and many persons such as myself working elsewhere in other properties, I don't care if the product itself isn't certified for organic production if the ingredients in it are fine. As I say, the plant doesn't know the difference, what words we use, what certifications we have, as long as there are no contaminants in there that's going to hurt the plants. So one reason why organic agriculture started like 100 years ago was that when urea was being produced for fertilizer, that the synthesis techniques used then were very poorly thought out and contaminated the urea with biuret, which is highly poisonous and caused a lot of damage. Nowadays you can get urea with close to zero biuret in it, so it's no longer an issue for most practical purposes. A naturally mined product which is used a lot in both conventional and organic fertilizers is muriate of potash, also known as potassium chloride. And that's allowed in organic production. I actually shy away from that because we need a lot of potassium and we don't need much chloride. Plants do use a little bit of chloride. That's another microelement that I forgot to mention earlier. But if you get a lot of chloride, it burns your root hairs. So the fact that it's doctrinally okay doesn't make it healthy for the plant in large quantities. Another amendment available here at Truly Tropical is azomite. That has many elements in it, many of which are not known to do any particular good for plants or any particular harm either. But there are many elements in there that are usually not included in conventional fertilizers, except maybe as contaminants, that can be useful either to the plants or to we persons who eat them. So we like a little bit of tin, a little bit of vanadium, and a little bit of chromium, and quite a few other elements like that that are not actually known to be helpful to plants, but could be. You know, you can't prove a negative. That's logically impossible until you find evidence that one of those elements is actually useful to the plant. You just assume that probably it's not, but if it's something we want to be in our food for our own nutrition, then great if the plant absorbs some and puts it in the fruit. One of the ingredients in azomite and in seaweed extract or ground up seaweed, which is another excellent amendment to add to soil because it has so many different elements. Like the azomite, the algae and seaweed has stuff in there that It's not known to be beneficial to plants, but could be, and a lot of stuff that is known to be beneficial, even in trace amounts. So selenium is said by some persons to improve fruit set. So we can use more fruit set most years. So that's not been proven with mangoes as far as I know, but you know, we can use selenium in our diet, and if the mango set more fruit with a bit of selenium, well, great. So seaweed extract and azomite, which is a ground up rock, you know, it's rock dust. You can get various rock dust as soil amendments, and that way you know you're adding a little bit of everything, and that way you sort of cover your behind, making sure that you're adding anything that a plant might need that we don't actually know that it needs. Some of you will get very nervous when you read the ingredients of anything that's naturally mined from rocks or soil or gathered from the sea, is that there's always contaminants. For instance, seaweed always has some mercury and some lead and some cadmium, some radioactive elements and so on. The same thing with any kind of rock dust, phosphate. You know, they try to take the fluoride out of phosphate fertilizer, and with that they take out most of the radioactive ingredients that were in the soil, but there's always some left. And when we're breathing air anywhere, we are breathing in a few atoms that are radioactive and a few atoms of lead. Even though it's heavy, when it's methylated, somehow it floats through the air. I made compost commercially years ago with garden waste and kitchen waste and office waste, and when I had it tested, it had a high amount of lead in it, which I was very displeased about. It was less than a fourth of the legally allowed amount of lead in compost, so it was legal, but I didn't consider it healthy to put around garden plants. So just try to be realistic. You look for the lowest amounts of contaminants when you compare products, but unless you decide to do nothing, you are going to end up using a product that has some kind or other of contaminants that with elements that you don't consider desirable.
So Har, that was a lot of great information. I know customers have been wondering about the dosage, so to speak, for each tree, how much to put on of certain amendments, and then also the technique you use to apply the amendments and fertilizers to the soil around the tree. So I was hoping that we could just take this bag of gypsum to a couple different trees, and you could say how much you would use, and then like show how to spread it. So,
well, starting with a 1 gallon container, if the plant's a foot or more high, you can put a 3-finger pinch, not full of fertilizer way up, just pinched at the bottom of the 3 fingers, and put it on one side and another pinch on the other side, and that's enough of these common fertilizers. If you use a fully coated 6-month slow release fertilizer, the expensive stuff, then you could put 1/4 teaspoon in a circle around the 1 gallon container. And so as you go up into larger sizes of containers, you can just multiply that amount and figure it. And you would also apply some gypsum in a similar amount separately. With trees recently planted in the ground, you know, like a 3-gallon root ball mango tree planted in the ground, you would wait 1 month and then put about half a handful of fertilizer spread mostly beyond where the roots actually are at the moment. You want the soil to be fertile and attractive to the roots as they move out. You want the fertilizer to already be there. And just keep moving up the amount and increasing the area as the tree and the roots grow. We do have a storm rolling in, so I think we need to boogie.
Yeah, I was hoping that we could go, I'll grab the golf cart and we'll go down the hill real quick. And
you can get these from A.M. Leonard catalog or amleo.com online. You can use it for digging, and there's a sharp serrated edge for cutting roots, but it works great for cutting open a fertilizer bag. Well, not as sharp as I thought it was. Oh, there's tape right there, that's why. Okay. I usually like for the bag of fertilizer to be left in something higher, so I don't have to pick it up from the ground. This is very finely prilled gypsum. You don't want it to actually be powder, or you're going to have product blowing away and getting in your nose and so on. This does make a little bit of dust, but not too bad. You can get gypsum in pellets that are much coarser than this, like almost an eighth of an inch across.
so this, of course, is the back of the grove, and we didn't get gypsum spread this last season before the fruit, and so we did on some of the trees get a little bit of jelly seed, and so that was one of my thoughts as far as putting gypsum on now, is to try to get the trees a little bit better able to withstand the conditions here. They'll be able to, as long as they can, we apply the gypsum a couple times before next season, they should be able to avoid that jelly seed.
Okay, so this is not a huge old tree, but we still have some rather thick roots right here, so we'll start out about a foot away from the trunk. And since this has not received gypsum before, at least not in the last 3 years, probably never, I'm going to put it out heavy, a corrective dose. So here's the drip line, but we don't stop at the drip line. We don't do a ring. We do the whole area. And since these trees are so close together, you would just do a solid strip. But I'm doing just this Marco tree, so I do need to go completely past that next tree to at least be getting all the main root area of the Marco tree. And even though this is a smallish tree, you can see we're going to be using like half a bag.
Yeah, I think we're past half.
So we would put this much on like 3 times, like every 4 months, and then ease up on the amount. Now, the next thing would be to spread fertilizer here if you're using a mixed fertilizer. Here at this grove, the mixed fertilizer is not used, but you would use something like sulfate of potash, magnesium.
We can leave that because we'll go to a different tree, to a different situation.
Sulfate of potash, magnesia, you know, a natural mined substance, and spread that. And you would not put nearly as much as I just put of gypsum. If you put half a bag of sulfate of potash, magnesia around a tree that size, you might kill it. So this is another huge old tree. It was a Hayden tree, and then Miss Chris Wenzel, the proprietor here at Truly Tropical, put multiple grafts on it of quite a few different varieties. So the one on this corner, if I remember right, is Orange Essence.
This is Honeykiss here.
Oh, this is Honeykiss. Okay. And I really don't want rain getting in this bucket of gypsum. It'll turn into mud. So much for that. I would put 2 bags of gypsum, 2 50-pound bags of gypsum on this one tree, and probably 2/3 of a bag of mixed fertilizer on this one tree. Remember, we're not only doing under the canopy, but the same distance beyond as from the trunk to the drip line. So it's a big circle, big area. Let's get out of the rain.
Yeah. Okay, so now it is hot and sunny. We really got soaked, and we had to cut the video off in order to save ourselves and the equipment. So that's just the way it goes. But we will be making a second video very soon, and we would like your help because we'd actually like you to put your questions about fertilizers and amendments in the comment section below. And so if you can do that, we will try to answer as many of those questions as we can on this upcoming video.